And now we're on the description field. The description field essentially is optional. It's really for you. If you want to store notes here, for example, to describe what this field is about, you can use the description field. For example, this is the customer's first name. Now for a first name field, this is kind of self-evident. But sometimes you might have a field name that is a little ambiguous. For example, in a minute we're going to make a field name called active. Well, what does that mean? This guy likes to exercise a lot? No, it means he's going to get our newsletters. So you might want to put that in the description field. I'll show you that in just a minute. Keep in mind, however, that description fields do show up on the status bar if you put this field on a form. So don't put anything in here that you wouldn't want your users to see. Alright, so let's hit tab again, and now we're down to the next field name. Let's go ahead and put in last name, again no spaces, and then tab over. Text is good, tab again. And I'm going to skip the description. Personally, I very seldom ever use the description field, so I'm just going to skip it, and then tab again. Now, what about middle initial? What about prefix, like Mr., Miss, Ms.? What about a suffix? That's completely up to you. Again, you can put as much or as little detail in your database as you think you're going to need. For the purposes of class, I'm going to keep my tables simple. I'm going to skip middle initial and all those different things. You can put whatever fields in your database you think you're going to need. And again, I recommend to use as much detail as you think you're ever going to need. If you think sometime in the future you might like to have middle initials, make a middle initial field. It's much, much easier to put fields together later on. For example, to display the name on a mailing label, it's easier to put together first name, middle initial, last name than it is to try and split them apart if you've got them all stuck in one field. So break them up and do as much detail as you want at this point. Alright, how about company name? Company name, and that can be text as well. Let's store their phone number. I'll just put in phone. Now, do I store the phone number as text or as a number? Let me think about that for a minute. Sometimes I get customer phone numbers that have letters in them, something like 1-800-FLOWERS. Well, I don't want to have to stop and look at my phone and figure out, okay, let's see here, F is 3, L is 5, and so on, and then type those numbers into my database. So I would like my database to be able to accept letters in the phone number field. So I think I'm going to store the phone number as text. Now here's my test. Here's how I decide whether or not to use text or a number. If you're ever going to be doing calculations on those numbers, then use a number field. If not, use a text field. For example, am I ever going to be adding up a column of phone numbers? Probably not. So I would use a text field, because I'm not going to be doing any calculations on phone numbers. We'll see a few other data types that we can store as text, even though they're numbers, in just a minute. Alright, so let's tab down here. How about a fax number? I'll just put in fax, and we'll store that as text as well. Let's go with address. I'll leave that as text. Now, a lot of people like to do an address to line. Again, that's completely up to you. Me personally, I generally can squeeze everything into one address line. So I'm just going to go with one address, and I'll mean that to be my street address. If you feel you need an address to line, then by all means, go ahead and add one. Let's go with city. Again, that can be text. State. And I'll go with zip code. We'll just call it zip. Now, I'm located in New York, so I'm going to assume that my database is built for customers in the United States. I do have some international customers, however, and I'm sure some of you watching this course are in other countries, so you may want to allow your database to accept information that doesn't rigidly fit into these field names. For example, zip in the United States is generally a 5-digit code. We'll see later how we can restrict these data types to only accept certain values, but also keep in mind up front in the future that there may be exceptions to the rules. So zip in this case could also be a general postal code. Now zip, or postal code, is also one of those types of data that could be stored as a number, but we might also want to be stored as text. For example, our good friends to the north in Canada do have text characters in their postal codes. So that's one instance where we want to have text in the zip code field. Also, even here in the United States, some zip codes start off with a 0. So if we had a number field here, that leading 0 would disappear. 09234 would just become 9234. So again, that's another reason why we want to use text. Other numbers like a social security number can also start with a 0. We don't want that leading 0 to disappear. So we'd use text to store a social security number. All right, let's add country. That can be text as well. I think just about every table should have a notes field for other information that doesn't necessarily fit into one of the fields we've got set up in the table. I have almost always put a notes field in every table. Now, for notes, we're going to pick memo, because you don't know how much information you want to put in here. It could be nothing. It could be many lines of text. So that's what memo fields are good for. All right, let's tab down. I would like to know how many employees each of my customers has. So let's type in here number of employees. And I'm going to abbreviate that num employees. You can use abbreviations if you want to in your tables for your field names. Just try to maintain some kind of consistency. I'll tab over here, and for this I'm going to pick number. Now, there are different kinds of number fields that we can work with, and you'll see them right down here. See this here? This is a long integer. Now we're going to spend a whole lot of time in the next Access class going over these field sizes for fields. But for today, all you really have to know, if we drop this little box down here, there are a bunch of different kinds of field sizes. The only two that you should worry about today are long integer and decimal. Long integer is the default, but it only allows for integer values, counting numbers, 1, 2, 3, and the negatives, negative 1, 2, 3, and so on. If you need a floating point number, a number with a decimal value, like 5.6, then pick decimal. Again, we'll talk about all these different weird ones like single and double in the next course. But for today, for a number of employees, I'm going to stick with long integer. So I'll click back up top here. All right, let's tab down to the next line. I'd like to know how long this person has been a customer. So let's type in customer since, and let's make this a date time field. So we can type in there February 1st, 1994, for example. Let's have a way to track this customer's credit limit. So credit limit, and we'll make that a currency. Notice how I can bring up currency just by hitting C on my keyboard. Most of these data types will allow you to just click on the first letter, C for currency, for example, and it'll fill that value in there. And let's put in active, and let's make this a yes or no value. Now again, what does active mean? Does a guy like to exercise a lot? No, that means that the customer will get our newsletter. We'll do a newsletter every month, and if the customer is an active customer, he'll get the newsletter. If not, if someone marks him not active, he won't get the newsletter. So that's where the description column comes in handy, because you can describe to other users what that field is for.